Hi, my name is Jared and this is Horror Obsession. Today, I want to talk about The Shining, a masterpiece in the horror genre and one of the best movies of all time.
Here's Jackie. Here's Jackie. Here's Johnny. Here's Pork Chop. Here's Donnie. Here's Cranky. Here's Corpsey!
Here's Bobby!
Here's Brucey! Here's Johnny! Here's Johnny! Here's Johnny! Here's Johnny! Here's Spency!
Here's Ducky! Here's Vicky!
That's odd. Usually the blood gets off at the second floor.
The Shining is a towering figure in cinema history, as evidenced by the staggering number of times it is referenced in pop culture, a small subset of which was shown just now. But why is this movie so ingrained in the minds of those who have seen it? Why do people still, to this day, write articles and make videos about new theories that might have finally cracked the enigma that is The Shining? In my mind, it is impossible to talk about The Shining without talking about its director, the peerless Stanley Kubrick. Kubrick is widely regarded as a mysterious auteur, a magician playing tricks on his audience but leaving clues as to his true intention hidden in plain sight. His obsessive demand for perfection is well cataloged, as is his painstaking research process. He would spend hours and countless takes setting up shots and had complete control of what was in the frame. The result is a filmography which is highly scrutinized by a rabid subset of fans, poring over every detail in search of mystical hidden meanings, and The Shining did not escape this hypercritical lens. On release, The Shining was met with mixed reviews from critics, including Janet Maslin of the New York Times, who praised Nicholson's performance but criticized the supernatural elements for being too confusing. Siskel gave The Shining 2 stars, calling it, quote, a crashing disappointment. The biggest surprise is that it contains virtually no thrills. Given Kubrick's world-class reputation, one's immediate reaction is that maybe he was after something other than thrills in the film. If so, it's hard to figure out what. The movie's biggest critic, however, was Stephen King, who absolutely hated the film and the way the characters and overall plot was altered. King is on the record saying it is the only adaptation of his novels he could remember hating. Since that time, however, the perception of the film has taken an almost complete 180 and is now widely considered one of the best movies of all time. So much so that there is a section on The Shining's Wikipedia page titled Reappraisal, where it lists the various awards and influence on pop culture. So why the disparity? How does a movie go from being largely despised and criticized to becoming one of the most influential movies of all time? The Shining is a deeply complex movie, and like most deeply complex art, most people do not appreciate the depth on an initial viewing. I have recommended The Shining to many people, and without fail, the response I get back is, it wasn't as scary as I thought it would be. The Shining does not revel in cheap thrills, disgust you with realistic gore, or disturb you with stereotypical and predictable horror elements like killing children, killing dogs, or having women raped. What The Shining does do is deliver a brilliant story with genius cinematography. So why is the story so brilliant? Kubrick wrote The Shining with Diane Johnson, who afterwards said about Stanley's approach to making The Shining, quote, it must be plausible, use no cheap tricks, have no holes in the plot, no failures of motivation. It must be completely scary. By cheap tricks, Diane is referring to what I was just discussing. The trifecta of cheap horror is rape, killing kids, and killing dogs. There are other elements, but those are the core ones. Does that mean if a horror movie includes any of these elements, it is automatically a bad movie? I don't think so, but for the most part, these are universally despised and reviled events, and including them in the movie is a bit like showing a half-naked woman in a commercial. It will probably work, but it's obvious and sleazy. The Shining shies away from the standard exploitation horror most lesser directors heavily rely on, and the result is a movie which derives most of the horror from a deep sense of unease. An unsettling feeling which is subtle and impossible to shake. Something horrible is coming, but we don't know exactly what or exactly when. As to the next point, are there really no holes in the plot or failures of motivation? Normally, I would walk through the plot of the movie, but honestly, it's best if you just watch it for yourself. If you insist on watching my video examining the nuances of the plot construction and themes of the film without watching it yourself, here is the one-sentence version. Jack Nicholson and his family are hired to look after a hotel for the winter, and Jack goes crazy. If you are a living human person in the United States, I suspect you already know at least this much. As far as whether the film has any failures of motivation, everyone acts rationally and realistically until the hotel starts to infiltrate their minds with its influence. We have no reason to question Jack or his family as to why they would take the job. Jack is looking for a place to write his book while getting paid, making the caretaker job seemingly perfect, and Wendy and Danny are his wife and kids, so it makes sense they would join. Kubrick and Diane decided to go with a realistic setup and execution, which was a smart decision, but certainly not the only reason The Shining is a brilliant horror movie. I want to talk about other elements of the film which worked well, all of which contributed to the movie being so deeply unsettling. First, the use of Kubrick uses title cards throughout the film. They wanted to structure the movie into 10 distinct segments and end up using title cards to separate those segments. Typically, title cards are a somewhat boring way to deliver information to the audience, usually where the scene is taking place, Kubrick weaponizes his title cards to create suspense and tension in the story, and he does this by accelerating the time frame between each one. The title cards go from the interview to closing day, then skips a month, then a couple days between each one before finally settling in on a specific time of an individual day. In combination with the visuals, acting, and story, which we will get to in a second, the title cards serve to create a sense of impending doom which is running towards us faster and faster. Kubrick is known for his obsessive attention to detail and mise-en-scène, which just means what's in the frame, but he really elevated The Shining to another dimension of complexity. Kubrick researched ways commercials use subliminal messaging to affect the viewers in specific ways, and utilized many of the techniques from commercials in the movie. Now, I will say up front that there are many people who have analyzed this movie that look at these details as having some deeper meaning, usually fitting some kind of narrative they themselves are already looking to confirm. For example, when Danny is in the bathroom, you can see the dopey dwarf on the door, but in a later shot, Dopey is gone. Some people have suggested this is because Danny has now had a vision and is no longer quote-unquote dopey and is less naive about the world, and this may be the case. Whether Kubrick intended it or not is somewhat irrelevant, and I do believe that art analysis should not be strictly confined to attempting to determine what the artist intended to say. If there is hidden meaning in something, as long as it is supported by evidence, then it is at least interesting to discuss. Where I draw the line is people who make art analysis and then claim to know that was the artist's intent, which I think happens to an absurd degree in this film. The dopey dwarf could mean Danny is enlightened, but I actually think it is much simpler. Kubrick researched ways to unsettle an audience, and one of the main ways is by having frames which are not matching. This is perfect in a ghost story since it seems the Overlook Hotel is quietly changing the environment around the family, attempting to drive them insane. Kubrick himself has described the movie as, quote, "It's just the story of one man's family quietly going insane together," end quote. The Overlook preys on Jack's drinking and Danny's ability to see the ghost to try and drive them to murder one another. Another example of this is when Wendy is talking to Jack in the Colorado room. There is a chair in the frame behind Jack, but when we cut back, the chair is gone. If you watch the documentary Room 237, people have literally used this as an example to support many pretty wild theories, but honestly, at times like this, it is important to listen to a brilliant psychiatrist.
First principles, Clarice. Simplicity. Read Marcus Aurelius. Of each particular thing, ask, what is it in itself? What is its nature?
Kubrick used this continually to attack the minds of the audience. For example, when the Grady girls are talking to Danny in the rec room, the chairs by the table move slightly between frames. When Ullman shows the Torrances the Gold Room, there are 7 chairs lined up at the bar, evenly spaced apart. When we cut back, the chairs are in disarray and clearly moved. When Wendy is talking to the child psychiatrist at the beginning, the chair behind her shifts from facing one way to facing the other. A clock in the kitchen moves away from the power line. A light switch on the wall disappears. The Gold Room sign moves from left to right. The mirror in this hallway disappears. The stand the Gold Room sign is on changes. There are actually far more examples than this, but I think it should get the point across. There are countless examples of objects in the shot changing position throughout the film. Any of these individually might be brushed away, assumed to be a continuity error, but all of them in combination, along with Kubrick's known reputation, make this basically impossible. These are on purpose, but why? Like I mentioned, Kubrick is attempting to unsettle the audience by slightly changing the position of objects in his shot to create the impression the hotel is alive, or in the case of the house, just to unsettle the audience. The Overlook itself is arguably the most important character of the entire film, and this is a great way to impose a sinister intent to the hotel onto the audience's subconscious. Kubrick does more than move objects in the frame to unsettle the audience. The most famous example of this is probably when Danny is sitting in the kitchen. The knives on the wall are pointing directly into Danny's head. This happens again when Halloran is showing Danny around. While this may seem like a minor detail, and honestly it is, all these minor details add up to create an atmosphere of dread and foreboding that is difficult to find in any other movie. Many people say they like atmospheric horror, and The Shining is the crown jewel of that subgenre. Another great example is when Danny is playing in the hall. This is one of my favorite scenes in a horror movie because it is so strangely disturbing. The fact the ball came rolling up from nowhere is definitely creepy, and the hotel is trying to get Danny's attention to go into room 237, but one detail most people miss is the carpet. In the first shot, Danny is sitting with the carpet pattern opening up and pointing towards the camera, which our brains will subconsciously interpret as being open and free. The next shot after the ball shows the pattern reversed, and now Danny is trapped by the outline of the carpet. I am not the first person to notice this detail, but I do think, once again, most people overanalyze this aspect. The idea is to create fear, and trapping Danny visually is an end in and of itself, and there does not need to be more to it than that. The acting was criticized heavily on release, most notably Shelley Duvall, as critics and audiences alike felt they were both overacting and chewing the scenery. Almost everyone now agrees the acting is excellent, and I don't need to waste words talking about how Jack Nicholson's performance carries the whole film. He is a menacing presence throughout, the kind of man who has one face to show to the world with another lurking just beneath the surface. Kubrick tells us exactly that by having Wendy tell the story of him hurting Danny to the psychiatrist. The effect is, once again, a sense of dread that Jack is going to snap and murder his family. I mean, after all, Mr. Ullman tells us in the opening scene that this already happened.
Well, obviously, some people can be put off by the idea of staying alone at a place where something like that actually happened.
Well, you can rest assured, Mr. Ullman, that's not going to happen with me.
The twist, which works masterfully, is that Jack has actually been crazy a lot longer than Wendy or the audience knew about. When Wendy goes through the papers and sees that Jack has been writing the same sentence over and over again for hundreds of papers, she realizes the man she thought she knew is gone, and she has been interacting with a deranged psychopath for a long time. Tragically, a fear of many people and a justifiably horrifying concept. This revelation sheds light on one of the fundamental reasons The Shining is so scary. Humans are scared of objects that act like people. Anything that can mimic a human well enough but is known to not be human is very, very disturbing. Seeing the twins in the hallway when Danny and the audience both know it is impossible for them to be there is terrifying. Wendy comes to realize that this isn't Jack, and while he looks like her husband, he's changed into something different, much like in the movie Annihilation or any of the Body Snatcher movies. Alright, that wraps up part 1 of my analysis of The Shining. In this video, we focused on what details make The Shining so scary, and next up I'm going to look at some of the theories surrounding the themes of The Shining, and conclude by revealing what I personally feel the major themes of the movie are.